Inheritance is a peculiar gift, often wrapped in the tattered ribbons of the past, a present offered with invisible strings that bind. When I received the letter informing me of my uncle's passing, I was startled more by the fact that he had left me something than by the news of his death. We weren't close, not by any modern definition of the term, but as the last living relative, the weight of his legacy fell, by default, upon my shoulders. The property was an old mansion, an edifice of crumbling grandeur nestled at the edge of a secluded wood in the small town of Ravens Hollow. I remembered visiting it once as a child, a distant memory shrouded in the fog of years, where the walls seemed alive with whispers and shadows stretched just a little too long. Upon arriving, the house stood stoically amidst the encroaching wilderness, its facade a tapestry of ivy and neglect. The windows were dark eyes peering out onto the world, and the front doors creaked with an audible groan as I stepped inside. Dust motes waltzed in the shafts of sunlight, breaking through the gaps in the heavy drapery, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and decay. Settling in required patience. The house resisted the intrusion of modernity, and I soon discovered that the electricity was capricious, flickering like a ghostly dance, and the plumbing groaned with every turn of the faucet. There was a pervasive sense of being watched, an intangible presence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Yet I attributed these feelings to my unfamiliarity with the place. Days passed in a monotonous blur, and I busied myself with exploring the vast array of rooms, each a glimpse into a past life. The library was particularly enchanting, its shelves lined with leather-bound tomes and manuscripts, a treasure trove for an avid reader like me. I would lose myself for hours among the pages, forgetting the world outside, until the sun dipped below the horizon, and the house slipped into a hushed expectation. It was during one such evening, as I sat ensconced in an armchair with a book clutched in my hands, that the first disturbance occurred. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that envelops and suffocates, when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It echoed through the room, resonating from the very walls, and I froze, listening intently. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. It took me a moment to realize that it was coming from the window, a gentle percussion that seemed to beckon. The rational part of my mind insisted it was merely the wind or a branch against the glass. Yet, as I approached, the tapping ceased altogether. Peering out into the night, I saw nothing but the darkness pressing against the pane. The unease lingered, a subtle undercurrent that tinged my thoughts with doubt and apprehension. I tried to shake it off, rationalizing it away as I returned to my book, but the tapping had left an indelible mark, a reminder that this house was not merely bricks and mortar, but something more, something alive. As the days stretched into weeks, the disturbances multiplied. Strange occurrences became my constant companions, items misplaced only to reappear where they shouldn't, cold drafts that whispered past me in rooms with closed windows, and the persistent feeling of being scrutinized by unseen eyes. Yet the true catalyst for the escalation came in the form of an old phonograph, discovered in the attic amidst a jumble of forgotten relics. The device was ancient, its wooden case polished to a deep luster, and it seemed out of place among the dust-covered trunks and relics of another era. As I examined it, I noticed a single, unmarked record resting beside it. Curiosity piqued, I carried it down to the library, where I set it up on a table. With a sense of anticipation, I placed the needle on the record. A crackling whisper preceded the music, an eerie melody that unfurled through the house, both haunting and beautiful. But it was not the music that held my attention. It was the voice, a voice that spoke between the notes, softly at first, like a lover's sigh. "Can you hear me?" it asked. I stood frozen, the question hanging in the air like smoke, my mind scrambling for a rational explanation. I convinced myself it was a pre-recorded message, some party trick designed to amuse or frighten. But the voice continued, its tone shifting, fluctuating with an emotion that felt almost tangible. "I've waited so long." An inexplicable chill swept through me, and I reached out to stop the record, but my hand faltered. There was a compelling force in the voice, a longing that sliced through to the core of me. "Please don't go." The plea, so raw and earnest, resonated within, stirring a well of empathy and curiosity. Against my better judgment, I allowed the record to play on, the voice weaving a narrative of sorrow and solitude, of things lost and forgotten. In the days that followed, the phonograph became a bridge to the past, a conduit through which the house communicated its secrets. Each time I played the record, the voice grew stronger, more distinct, and I began to discern a story, a tragedy etched in the fabric of the walls, echoing through the corridors of time. My uncle, it seemed, had not lived alone. There was another presence, a woman whose spirit had become intertwined with the house itself. Her name was Eleanor, and through the voice, she spoke of love and betrayal, of a longing that transcended death. She was trapped, bound to the physical realm by a promise unkept, and the house was her prison. As I pieced together the fragments of her tale, my reality began to warp, the boundary between the living and the dead blurring into ambiguity. The tapping at the window resumed, a gentle reminder of her presence, and I found myself drawn to her story, compelled to uncover the truth. The climax came one stormy night, as lightning slashed through the sky and thunder rumbled like a distant drumbeat. I sat in the library, the record spinning, Eleanor's voice weaving her tapestry of woe. But this time, there was an urgency, a desperation that clutched at my heart. "You must help me," she pleaded, her voice rising above the storm, an echo that reverberated through the very bones of the house. "I'm so close, so very close." Driven by an impulse I could not name, I followed the voice, tracing a path through the darkened halls, guided by an unseen hand. The house seemed to shift around me, walls closing in, corridors stretching into infinity, until I reached a door I had not noticed before. It led to a room shrouded in shadows, where the air was thick with the scent of roses long dead, and there, at the center, stood a mirror, its surface a silvered void. As I approached, the voice crescendoed, a symphony of anguish and hope. "Release me," Eleanor implored, her reflection shimmering amidst the glass, a vision both ethereal and haunting. I hesitated, my hand poised above the mirror's surface, fear and compassion warring within. The storm outside raged, an elemental fury that matched the tumult in my soul. And then, with a final act of resolve, I touched the glass. The world seemed to convulse, a kaleidoscope of light and sound, and I was engulfed in a whirlpool of sensations, the barrier between us shattering with a force that left me breathless. For a moment, I glimpsed Eleanor's world, a realm of twilight and memory, where shadows danced and time held no sway. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. I found myself alone in the room, the mirror now a blank slate. The storm abated. The house was silent, an expectant stillness that spoke of release, and I knew that Eleanor was gone, her spirit unshackled from its earthly chains. In the days that followed, the house seemed to breathe easier. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, allowing sunlight to spill through the windows and laughter to echo in the halls. The disturbances ceased, and the presence that had haunted my every step was no more. Yet the experience left a mark, an indelible impression that lingered at the edges of my consciousness. The house was mine now, a sanctuary and a reminder of the past it had borne witness to. But the story of Eleanor and her release was only a chapter in its long history, the shadows of its secrets still whispering beneath the surface. Occasionally, when the night is still and the world is asleep, I find myself drawn to the library, to the phonograph, and the silent record. Though the voice no longer speaks, the memory of her song remains, a haunting melody that resonates within, echoing through the corridors of my mind. And so I live here, amidst the echoes of the past, the inheritance of a nightmare transformed into a testament of redemption. But ever so often, as the wind whispers through the trees and the moon casts its ethereal glow, I wonder, did I truly set her free, or does her shadow still linger, a part of the house as eternal as the stone and wood that form its walls? The house stands, a guardian of secrets, an embodiment of history and memory, where the living and the dead dance in a perpetual waltz. And I, the inheritor of this haunted legacy, am both its keeper and its captive, bound by the stories that it holds and the echoes that forever haunt its halls. The mansion was an enigma, perched solemnly on the rocky cliffs of Maine, overlooking the turbulent Atlantic Ocean. This grand estate, with its Gothic spires and labyrinthine halls, was a world unto itself, a relic of an era long past. When the news came that I had inherited this ancestral home, a mix of curiosity and apprehension washed over me. I had heard whispers of my great uncle's eccentricity, and the estate, long abandoned, had become the stuff of local legends. As I stepped through the wrought iron gates for the first time, I was struck by the mansion's commanding presence. The air carried a salty tang intertwined with the musky scent of old wood and stone. I could almost hear the echoes of long-gone laughter and whispers behind each window pane. Inside, the rooms unfolded like chapters of a forgotten book, each filled with the dust of decades and memories I had never known. The library, with its towering shelves and leather-bound volumes, pulled me in with a sense of profound calm. Nestled in an oversized armchair, I found myself losing hours to the stories contained within those pages. It was during one such evening, as I was lost in thought, that I first noticed the peculiarities of the house. It began with the grandfather clock in the hallway, an imposing structure of dark walnut that seemed to tick with a life of its own. Late one night, as the clock struck 12, I realized that the chimes didn't just echo through the halls, they reverberated with an unusual intensity, as though they were waking something within the walls. My rational mind dismissed it as a relic of an old house, a mere quirk in its mechanical heart. But a seed of unease was planted. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn to the basement, a place I had initially avoided due to a natural aversion to dark, confined spaces. It was a surprisingly cavernous area, its stone walls lined with forgotten relics of my family's past. It was here that I found the first of the rules, inscribed on a yellowed piece of parchment, wedged between the stones of the wall. The handwriting was elegant, yet urgent, spelling out a series of instructions. Do not be awake during the witching hour. Never leave a door open after entering a room. Speak softly, for the walls have ears. The discovery of this list should have sent me running, but instead, it intrigued me. My rational mind searched for explanations, a playful relative, a child's game, but the words held a weight that I couldn't quite dismiss. The atmosphere of the house shifted subtly, an intangible tension threading through the air. I tried to follow the rules, more out of curiosity than fear. Yet, the house seemed to be testing me. Doors would swing ajar without reason, and whispers, soft as a summer breeze, would flit through the corridors when I was certain I was alone. Nights became restless, the creaking of floorboards and the sigh of the wind outside my constant companions. Each morning, I awoke with the unsettling feeling of being watched, as if the very walls were keeping vigil over my sleep. The escalation was gradual yet undeniable. Shadows lengthened in defiance of the light, and the once soothing rhythm of the ocean turned into a relentless symphony of crashes and whispers. One evening, as a storm raged outside, I took refuge in the library. As I sat reading, I heard it, a low humming sound that seemed to rise from the very core of the house. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but beneath it lay an unsettling discord, a note that tugged uncomfortably at the edges of my consciousness. I followed the sound through the winding corridors, drawn deeper into the mansion's embrace. It led me to a room I had never intended to enter, the attic. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as I ascended the narrow stairs. The space was filled with relics covered in sheets and forgotten memories. In the center of the room stood an old gramophone, its horn gleaming dully in the dim light. The source of the melody, impossibly, was the machine, its turntable spinning slowly though I hadn't touched it. The music stopped abruptly as I stepped closer, and the sudden silence was jarring. I turned to leave, but a voice, soft and insistent, whispered my name. It was a voice I recognized, not from memory, but from dreams that had visited me since my arrival. It was a voice cloaked in sorrow and longing, a voice that pleaded for acknowledgement. A chill swept over me, and I retreated down the stairs, my mind racing. How could this be? The rational part of me insisted I was imagining things, that stress and isolation were taking their toll. Yet, deep down, An instinctive part of me understood that this was far more than a figment of my imagination. I returned to the library and found myself drawn to the portraits of my ancestors lining the walls. Their eyes, painted with such lifelike detail, seemed to follow me, holding secrets I was desperate to uncover. Among the portraits, one stood out, a woman with gentle eyes and a serene smile, her likeness so familiar it was almost as though I had known her. Beneath her portrait was a name, Eleanor. As I gazed at her image, the whispers began again, gentle yet insistent. I spent the night poring over family records and letters, piecing together the fragments of Eleanor's story. She had lived in the house many years ago, a talented musician whose life had been cut tragically short. Her death, shrouded in mystery, had left a silence that seemed to echo through time itself. With each discovery, the haunting grew more intense. Objects moved from their places, doors opened and closed with a will of their own, and the whispers grew louder. The house seemed to breathe around me, its presence as palpable as my own. I realized that I was not alone in this house. Eleanor's spirit lingered, bound by unfinished business. Driven by a need to understand, I began to communicate with her. At first, my attempts were clumsy, a mixture of whispered questions and hopeful thoughts. But slowly, a connection formed, and in the stillness of the night, I sensed her responses, not in words, but in feelings and impressions that filled the air. Through this tenuous link, I learned of Eleanor's longing, her desire to finish the symphony she had begun in life. The music that had called to me from the attic was her unfinished composition, a melody that sought completion, a story that yearned to be told. The climax of this strange communion came one stormy night when the house was alive with energy. I sat at the piano, Eleanor's unfinished manuscript spread before me, my fingers finding the keys as though guided by an unseen hand. The music flowed, a haunting elegy that filled the air with its beauty and sadness. It was as if we were one, my hands an extension of her will, crafting a melody that transcended time and space. As the final notes faded, a profound silence fell over the house. The oppressive weight that had lingered lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and fulfillment. Eleanor's spirit, at long last, was free. The whispers ceased, and the mansion, once a brooding presence, seemed to exhale and settle into quiet contentment. Yet, the fear remained, woven into the fabric of the house and my own mind. Though Eleanor had found her peace, the mansion still held its secrets, its past steeped in shadows that would never fully dissipate. The rules, once so cryptic, now seemed a part of the natural order of this place, a guide to coexisting with the unseen forces that lingered just beyond the veil of perception. I stayed on in the mansion, drawn to its mysteries and the stories it held, aware that other spirits might walk its halls, each with its own tale to tell. The fear was no longer paralyzing, but had become a part of the rhythm of life here, a constant reminder of the thin line between the living and the spectral. As I wander through the now familiar corridors, I occasionally catch a whisper, a fleeting glimpse of a shadow, and I am reminded of Eleanor and the music we created together. The mansion, with its haunted rooms and lingering echoes, has become a sanctuary, a testament to the enduring bonds of love and creativity that transcend even death. The fear remains, a delicate thread running through the tapestry of my days, a reminder of the mysteries that dwell within the walls and within us all. I bought the house on a whim. It was one of those whims that you convince yourself is driven by a profound sense of destiny, rather than a self-indulgent escapade. Nestled on the outskirts of a sleepy town, the house was a relic of centuries past, draped in ivy and mystery. Its price was suspiciously reasonable, given its handsome facade and spacious grounds. I convinced myself it was a refuge from the chaos of city life, a place where I could retreat and lose myself in writing. The previous owners had left abruptly, leaving behind an assortment of furniture and trinkets that whispered of their erstwhile presence. The house exuded a sense of forgotten grandeur. Each room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. The kitchen, however, felt oddly different. Its old-world charm was accompanied by an inexplicable aura of expectation, as though it was guarding a secret. It was on the second day, as I sought to familiarize myself with every nook and cranny, that I felt the first tremor of disturbance. The kitchen floor creaked beneath my weight, but it was more than the usual groan of age-weary wood. It was a sound that resonated with a hollow echo. The sensation was peculiar enough to pique my curiosity. I tapped lightly on the floor with my heels, tracing a path of resonance which led me to the farthest corner of the room. There, concealed beneath an ancient rug, was a trapdoor. It was an unexpected find, yet it held a compelling allure, like the promise of a hidden chapter in a story long told. I pulled the rug aside, revealing the latch that had not been used in what appeared to be years. With a slight hesitation, I lifted the door on its rusty hinges, revealing a steep descent into shadows. The air that rushed forth was stale, laced with a faint mustiness that spoke of secrets long buried. I stood at the threshold, peering into the abyss below. It was then that a chill, quite separate from the tangible cold, caressed my spine. My instincts urged caution, but my curiosity propelled me forward. I descended the creaking wooden steps, one hand tracing the rough wall for support. The room was small and unremarkable at first glance. Cobwebs adorned the corners, and dust lay like a soft veil over everything. Yet, amidst the ordinary, there lingered an unsettling sense of presence. On a rickety table rested an assortment of objects, each one seemingly benign, yet collectively they exuded an ominous energy. There was a tattered journal, pages yellowed with age, its spine broken, a brass key, tarnished and forgotten, a porcelain doll, its eyes unsettlingly lifelike, poised unnaturally on a rocking chair. Each item seemed possessed of a story, the sum of which made the air thick with unspoken words. I reached out to touch the journal, and as my fingers brushed its cover, a soft whisper whisked through the air, like a sigh from the past. I retreated hastily, a shiver coursing through my veins. The rational part of my mind sought explanations in drafts and echoes, but I couldn't dispel the impression that the room had awoken from a long slumber, aware of my intrusion. The days that followed were marked by an increasing restlessness. The house, once a sanctuary, began to feel crowded with shadows that skulked just beyond the periphery of my vision. The kitchen, in particular, seemed to pulse with an invisible heartbeat. Objects I had not touched shifted in my absence, and the air vibrated with a silent tension. Even the ticking of the clock seemed oddly out of sync, as if keeping time differently in this corner of the world. At night, I was plagued by dreams that were not my own. They were glimpses of lives lived in the shadows of this house, fragmented memories that were both foreign and familiar, faces blurred in sorrow, laughter that dissolved into wails, and a persistent sense of being watched. I would wake drenched in cold sweat, the echoes of those dreams clinging to my senses like a cloying perfume. The reality of my situation settled heavily on my shoulders. I was not alone in this house. The people who once inhabited these walls lingered, tethered to their forgotten relics. I became obsessed with the room beneath the kitchen, convinced that it held the key to the spectral occupants. One evening, driven by an impulse I could neither define nor resist, I returned to the hidden room. The atmosphere was oppressive, each breath laden with an indefinable weight. The journal beckoned me again, its cover mottled with age. I opened it cautiously, revealing pages filled with elegant script. It was a diary of sorts, chronicling the life of a woman named Eleanor who once called this house her home. Her words were imbued with melancholy, an unyielding despair that seeped through the faded ink. She wrote of a love lost, a betrayal that shattered her spirit, and a pact she made in desperation. Her writings became increasingly erratic, culminating in a fevered scrawl that spoke of visitors, people who came after her, drawn by the sorrow she couldn't escape. I could almost feel Eleanor's presence in the room, a mournful specter bound by her own suffering. The realization that her anguish might have found form in the objects around me was both alarming and saddening. The doll, the key, each held a piece of her soul, and the room was a shrine to her torment. My understanding of the house changed profoundly. It was not haunted in the traditional sense. Rather, it was a repository of emotions too intense to dissipate. The disturbance I felt was Eleanor's legacy. and I was merely the latest in a line of recipients forced to confront her reality. The manifestations of her lingering presence grew bolder. Muffled voices conversed in the dead of night, and the doll's eyes followed me with an unsettling awareness. The house seemed to breathe alongside my own rhythm, each exhale a reminder of Eleanor's plight. My attempts to rationalize the occurrences were futile. Logic had no place in the face of such pervasive sorrow. The climax of this eerie unraveling came one stormy night. The wind howled through the trees, and rain lashed at the windows with the fury of a tormented spirit. I was drawn, almost compelled, to the kitchen. The trapdoor was ajar, and from the depths below, a soft light beckoned. I descended into the dim glow, the air crackling with tension. A presence, palpable and potent, enveloped the room. Eleanor's essence was a storm unto itself, a maelstrom of emotions that swirled around me. I was engulfed in a wave of sorrow, a collective grief that resonated through my bones. In that moment, I understood that Eleanor's story was not hers alone. It was a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives that intersected with hers, each imprinting a part of themselves on the house. The people who came after her, those who felt, suffered, and lived, contributed to the haunting, and I, too, was becoming part of this living history. Suddenly, the light flickered, and I was plunged into darkness. The sensation of being watched intensified, but instead of fear, there was a strange sense of belonging. I was part of a continuum, another soul absorbed into the house and narrative. The whispers enveloped me, not with malice, but with a yearning for acknowledgement. When I emerged into the muted light of dawn, the house felt transformed. The boundaries between past and present seemed to blur, and with it, a new understanding dawned. The entities within the house were not seeking to harm, but to be remembered, their stories yearning to be acknowledged. As I settled back into the rhythms of daily life, the disturbances faded into a gentle hum, a background chorus that accompanied my solitary hours. The house became a companion of sorts, each creak and sigh a greeting from its invisible inhabitants. I found an unexpected solace in this coexistence, our lives entwined by shared awareness. Yet, in the quiet moments when the world paused, a lingering fear remained, a fear of the unknown, of the unseen. The people who came after Eleanor, who now included me, were bound to this place by more than just bricks and mortar. We were part of its essence, and it was part of ours. The house, with its hidden room and mysterious artifacts, held us in its thrall, a reminder of the intangible connections that tether us to the past. In those moments, I would find myself drawn to the trapdoor, fingers tracing its contours with a reverence born of understanding. I would listen to the soft whispers that drifted up from below, a symphony of voices lost to time, each note a testament to lives once lived. The truth was clear. Eleanor, the house, and its inhabitants were not just specters of the past. They were the people who come after you, eternally present, silently watching, waiting to weave their stories into your own. The old Victorian house stood solemnly at the end of the street, its ornate gables and intricate woodwork a testament to an era long past. For years, it had been a fixture in the neighborhood, a silent observer of the season's ebb and flow. The locals referred to it simply as the house, as if no other name could do justice to its brooding presence. It was said to be haunted, though no one quite knew by whom or what. My name is Clara, and I had grown up just a few blocks away. As a child, I was both terrified and enthralled by the stories of ghosts that were said to linger within its walls. Tales of flickering lights and mysterious footsteps woven through the fabric of our community like the intricate lace curtains that adorn the housey windows. Yet, despite its ominous reputation, I found myself drawn to it, as if the house was whispering secrets only I could understand. I lived a quiet life, working as an administrative assistant in a law firm. My days were filled with schedules, spreadsheets, and the mundane rhythm of office life. At night, however, my thoughts often drifted to the house. I would sometimes walk by it on my way home, imagining the stories it could tell if only it had a voice. It was on one such evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the street, that I noticed something unusual. A light flickered in one of the upper windows, then vanished as quickly as it had appeared. My heart leapt in my chest, and I stood frozen on the sidewalk, my breath visible in the cool evening air. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light or perhaps a reflection. But somewhere deep within me, I knew it was more than that. As I continued my walk home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from inside the house. I tried to dismiss it, attributing the sensation to an overactive imagination fueled by childhood stories. But as the days passed, the sensation only grew stronger. I began to experience an eerie sense of familiarity with the house, as if the lingering presence inside was reaching out to me specifically. Unable to ignore it any longer, I decided to confide in my friend, Margot, a self-proclaimed medium who had a reputation for helping both the living and the dead find peace. Though I was skeptical of her abilities, the strange occurrences surrounding the house compelled me to seek her counsel. When I shared my experiences with her, she listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It sounds like a spirit is trying to communicate with you," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "Sometimes, the dead cling to the living in search of closure. Perhaps that's what's happening here." Despite my doubts, I agreed to accompany Margot to the house. Part of me wanted to uncover the truth, to understand why this presence had chosen to disrupt my life. Together, we made our way to the old Victorian, the air thick with anticipation and an unspoken sense of dread. The front door creaked ominously as we stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of dust and time. The interior was just as I had imagined, faded wallpaper peeling from the walls, floors creaking beneath our feet, and an oppressive silence hanging in the air like a shroud. Margot closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as she attuned herself to the energies of the house. "It's here," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you feel it?" I nodded, a shiver running down my spine. There was a palpable presence in the room, an unseen entity that seemed to wrap itself around us with an unsettling familiarity. Margot began to speak softly, reaching out to the spirit, inviting it to make its presence known. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, as if in response to her invitation, a soft, mournful wail filled the air, echoing through the empty corridors. I felt a chill seep into my bones, and I instinctively stepped closer to Margot for comfort. "It's okay," she whispered, her hand reassuringly squeezing mine. "It's trying to communicate." We moved through the house, guided by Margot's intuition and the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Each room seemed to tell a story, faded photographs of a family long gone, a child's toy abandoned in a corner, a dusty piano standing proudly in the parlor, its keys silent under decades of neglect. As we explored, I began to piece together fragments of the past. It became clear that the spirit haunting the house was not malevolent, but rather lost, trapped in a cycle of sorrow and longing. Margot's conversations with the spirit revealed that it belonged to a woman named Eliza, who had lived in the house many years ago. Her life had been marked by tragedy, the death of her young daughter, and the subsequent dissolution of her family. Unable to bear the burden of her grief, Eliza had taken her own life, leaving her spirit bound to the place she had once called home. As we reached the attic, the air grew colder, and I could almost feel the weight of Eliza's despair pressing down on us. Margot sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed in deep concentration. She spoke gently, coaxing Eliza's spirit to let go of the pain that tethered her to this world. "Eliza," Margot called softly, "your daughter is waiting for you on the other side. She's at peace, and she wants the same for you." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing, mingling with the distant creaks and groans of the house. Then, I felt a shift in the air, a lightness, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. Margot opened her eyes, a serene smile on her lips. "She's gone," she said, her voice filled with quiet triumph. "She's finally at peace." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, relief washing over me like a gentle tide. The oppressive weight that had lingered in the house had lifted, leaving behind a sense of tranquility. As we made our way back down the stairs, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see a spectral figure watching us with sad, grateful eyes. The experience had been both unsettling and profoundly moving. I had come to the house seeking answers, and in doing so, had played a part in helping a tormented soul find peace. It was a humbling realization, one that left me with a newfound respect for the unseen forces that linger at the edges of our understanding. In the days that followed, I noticed a change in the atmosphere around the house. The oppressive heaviness that had once shrouded it was gone, replaced by a calm stillness. It was as if the very air was infused with gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the peace that had been restored. Despite the resolution, I found myself drawn to the house even more than before. I would often walk past it, pausing to admire the intricate woodwork and the way the light danced across the windows. There was no longer a sense of fear or unease, only a quiet reminder of the lives that had once filled its rooms. Yet, the experience had left an indelible mark on me. The boundary between the living and the dead had been blurred, and I couldn't shake the feeling that other spirits might reach out to me in search of solace. It was a sobering thought, one that both frightened and fascinated me in equal measure. Margot, ever perceptive, seemed to sense this change in me. "You've opened yourself to the other side," she said one evening as we sipped tea in my cozy living room. "But remember, you can choose whether or not to listen." Her words offered comfort, but the lingering fear remained, a shadow at the edge of my consciousness, reminding me of the fragile barrier that separates our world from the next. The experience had awakened something within me, a connection to the unseen that I couldn't easily dismiss. As I lay in bed at night, the moonlight casting gentle beams across my room, I would sometimes feel a presence, a whisper of a spirit seeking acknowledgement. It was never threatening, but rather a gentle reminder of the mysteries that exist beyond our understanding. In time, I came to accept this connection as a part of who I was. It was not a burden, but a gift, a reminder that every life, no matter how fleeting, leaves an imprint on the world. The house, with its stories of love and loss, had taught me that, and I carried that lesson with me, a talisman against the fear of the unknown. In the end, the house was no longer just a building at the end of the street, but a testament to the enduring power of memory and the resilience of the human spirit. It stood as a silent guardian of the past, its walls a sanctuary for those who needed to find their way home. And in its embrace, I found a sense of peace, knowing that we are all part of a greater tapestry, woven together by the threads of the seen and unseen. When I returned to my childhood home after nearly 2 decades, it was with a sense of obligation rather than nostalgia. My parents had passed away within a year of each other, leaving the old house on the outskirts of our small town to me. It stood there, a silent sentinel of my past, its Victorian architecture looming against the backdrop of a cloud-streaked sky. The years had not been kind. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown. Yet, despite its neglect, the house whispered memories I had long attempted to forget. I was near 15 when I left, and the house, much like myself, had been different then. Vibrant, alive with the chatter of family gatherings, the scent of my mother's cooking wafting through the corridors, and the comforting hum of a life well lived. But time, it seemed, had drained the place of its vitality, leaving behind an echo of what once was. I stepped inside, immediately enveloped by a musty smell that was both foreign and familiar. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams streaming through stained glass windows, painting the hardwood floors with dappled light. The house was eerily still, the silence heavy, as though waiting for something or someone to stir it back to life. As I wandered through the rooms, memories flitted around me like ghosts. There was the study where my father would read to me, his voice a rumbling comfort. The kitchen, where my mother seemed forever in motion, always with a smile, even if a tired one. The parlor, with its grand piano, where my sister and I would perform impromptu concerts to our parents' amused applause. Each room held a fragment of the life I had once known, yet it all felt distant, as though these memories belonged to someone else. The first night passed uneventfully, save for a few creaks and groans that all old houses make. I attributed them to the settling of the house, the shifting of its weary bones. But as the days went by, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. It was subtle at first, like a chill breeze brushing against the back of my neck, but soon enough, it became harder to ignore. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee, I heard a faint melody drifting through the air. It was a tune I recognized instantly, an old lullaby my mother used to hum. The sound was delicate, almost fragile, as if carried on a breeze. I set my mug down, heart thumping in my chest, and followed the sound through the corridors. The melody led me to the parlor, where the grand piano sat, silent as ever. I stood there, half expecting to see the keys moving of their own accord, but they remained still. The music faded, leaving only the sound of my own breathing. I shook my head, laughing nervously at my imagination. It was nothing, I told myself, just the house playing tricks on me. But the disturbances did not end there. Over the following days, I began to notice other peculiarities. Objects would shift from where I had left them. A book moved from the coffee table to the mantelpiece. A photograph turned face down. At night, I would hear footsteps echoing down the hallway, too heavy to be a figment of my imagination. I found myself growing uneasy, the house presence increasingly oppressive. The walls seemed to close in around me, casting long shadows that flickered like flames. It was as if the house itself were alive, watching me, waiting. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, stress manifesting in strange ways as I adjusted to life without my parents. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. The final straw came one evening as I was sorting through boxes in the attic. I stumbled upon an old journal belonging to my sister, a relic from her teenage years. She had left for college shortly after I did, and we had drifted apart over the years. As I flipped through the pages, I was struck by an entry written shortly before she too had left home. In her neat, looping script, she described hearing voices and music in the house, much like I had. She wrote of a presence she felt, a sensation of being watched. Her words echoed my own experiences, sending a shiver down my spine. I realized with a sinking feeling that this was no mere coincidence. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to confront whatever haunted the house. That night, as darkness fell and the familiar creaks and groans began, I steeled myself and waited. The clock ticked loudly in the silence, each minute dragging into the next. Then, just past midnight, I heard it, a soft, mournful melody wafting through the air. My heart pounded as I followed the sound, which led me once more to the parlor. There, the piano stood, bathed in the ghostly glow of moonlight. The music grew louder, enveloping the room in its ethereal embrace. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath forming in clouds before me. The sensation of being watched intensified, and I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the room. And then I saw her, a shadow standing just beyond the reach of the light, watching me with eyes that glinted like embers. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice quivering. The figure stepped forward, and I felt a sudden wash of familiarity. She was young, no more than 20, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of ages. Her presence felt both foreign and intimate, as though I knew her from some forgotten dream. "I am what was left behind," she replied, her voice a soft echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A chill swept over me, yet I couldn't look away. There was something in her gaze, a pleading, a desperate need. "What happened here?" I asked, compelled by a force I couldn't explain. She hesitated, her form wavering as though she might vanish. "This house holds many secrets," she said finally. "Memories trapped in its walls, unable to find peace." Her words struck a chord deep within me, and I understood then that she was not the cause of the disturbances, but another victim, trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. The house, with its layers of history, had absorbed the emotions of those who lived here, echoing them back as whispers and shadows. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice stronger now, driven by a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "Remember," she said simply, "acknowledge what once was, and in doing so, set it free." The room seemed to shift, the tension easing as if the house itself were listening, waiting for my response. I nodded, understanding what she meant. I had spent years running from my past, from the memories that haunted me. But perhaps it was time to face them. As if satisfied by my resolve, the figure began to dissolve, her form melding with the shadows until she was gone. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifting. The melody faded, leaving only silence in its wake. In the days that followed, I took her words to heart. I walked through the house, touching the walls, the furniture, each object a thread in the tapestry of my past. I allowed the memories to wash over me, acknowledging them for what they were, a part of me, yet not the entirety. Gradually, the disturbances ceased. The house seemed to relax, as if a long-held tension had been released. Though the shadows still danced in the corners and the floors creaked underfoot, they no longer felt threatening. They were simply part of the house's character, reminders of its history. Yet, even as I prepared to leave, a lingering fear remained, not of the house itself, but of what it represented. It was a repository of memories, both joyous and painful, a reminder of the passage of time and the inevitability of change. But instead of running from it, I embraced it, knowing that these memories, like ghosts, would always be a part of me. As I drove away, the house stood in my rearview mirror, a distant silhouette against the horizon. It was no longer a place of fear, but one of understanding, a place where the past and present could coexist, where memories could be both haunting and healing. And though I left it behind, I carried with me the knowledge that I could face the ghosts of my past, and in doing so, find a semblance of peace. The midsummer sun hovered lazily in the sky as I drove along the winding country road that led to my grandmother's house. It had been years since I'd visited, my life tangled in the busy web of city living. I had almost forgotten the way the light danced through the canopy of trees that lined the road, casting flickering shadows across the worn patch of dirt and gravel. My grandmother's house sat at the end of this road, nestled within the arms of the woods, like a secret she'd kept from the rest of the world. The journey was a pilgrimage of sorts, a return to a place where my childhood memories lay scattered like forgotten toys. The house itself was an old Victorian structure, her last remaining link to a bygone era. Its wooden facade was painted a soft yellow, the color peeling like old parchment, and the porch sagged a little more with each passing year. Wild roses bloomed defiantly around the edges, their scent mingling with the warm aroma of earth and pine. Stepping out of the car, the sound of birdsong greeted me, a symphony of nature that was both foreign and familiar. I paused, suitcase in hand, to take it all in, the tranquility, the gentle hum of life unburdened by time. A soft breeze brushed against my skin, whispering secrets of summers past. The house appeared as inviting as ever, yet there was an inexplicable heaviness in the air, as if the very walls held their breath. Inside, the house was a museum of my grandmother's life. Each room was carefully preserved, filled with mementos and relics that spoke of stories long since forgotten. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a steady rhythm, its sound echoing through the quiet space. I could still picture my grandmother, her gentle smile, and the way her eyes twinkled with mischief as she busied herself in the kitchen or tended to her beloved garden. I spent the afternoon wandering through the house, reacquainting myself with its nooks and crannies. The nostalgia was comforting, a balm for my restless soul. Yet, amidst the comfort, a peculiar unease began to creep into my mind, a faint sensation tickling the edges of my perception. It was as though I was being watched, a presence lurking just beyond my sight. Dismissively, I shook it off, attributing it to the unfamiliarity and the stories of ghosts that had been woven into the fabric of this house by generations of children, including myself. As evening descended, I settled into the small upstairs bedroom that had once been mine during summer visits. The room was unchanged, a perfect snapshot of my childhood with its faded wallpaper and a small bookshelf filled with adventure novels. That night, I lay in bed, lulled by the rhythmic chirping of crickets outside the window. Sleep came easily, but it was not the restful slumber I had hoped for. Instead, I found myself adrift in vivid dreams, strange and disconcerting. In these dreams, the house seemed to pulse with life, breathing with a soft, rhythmic cadence. Shadows moved with deliberate intent, weaving in and out of the corners of my mind. I awoke suddenly, the room cloaked in the deep darkness of night. The air was heavy, thickened by an unsettling silence that pressed in on me from all sides. Even the reassuring tick of the grandfather clock was absent, leaving an oppressive void that swallowed all sound. I sat up, heart pounding against my ribs, and strained to listen. My eyes scanned the room, searching for the source of my unease. That's when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. It was coming from the hallway, a sound so faint that I wondered if it was merely my imagination. I hesitated, my breath caught in my throat, and turned on the bedside lamp. The dim light spilled into the room, casting long shadows that danced mockingly across the walls. Gathering my courage, I slipped out of bed and padded quietly to the door. With a tentative hand, I opened it, the old hinges groaning in protest. The hallway stretched before me, shrouded in shadows. I stepped forward, my feet moving of their own accord, drawn by an invisible thread. The whispering grew louder, a dissonant chorus echoing down the darkened corridor. Compelled by an urgent curiosity, I followed the sound until it led me to the entrance of my grandmother's bedroom. The door stood ajar, as though inviting me inside. I hesitated for a moment, a silent conflict raging within me, but the voices were insistent. Taking a deep breath, I crossed the threshold. The room was much as I remembered it, though dust now clung to the once polished surfaces. The moonlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting an ethereal glow over the space. In the center of the room stood my grandmother's old vanity, its mirror reflecting the glint of moonbeams. And there, on the edge of perception, something moved, a flicker, a hint of motion that sent a shiver down my spine. I approached the vanity, my reflection a pale ghost in the glass. As I drew nearer, the whispering intensified, a cacophony of incoherent voices filling the air. They seemed to emanate from the mirror itself, a portal to some unseen dimension. I reached out, my fingertips brushing the cool surface, and the voices surged, as if in response to my touch. Closer, they implored, the word clear and distinct among the chaos. A chill swept over me, and I pulled back, heart racing. The room felt suddenly cold, a frigid breath that cut through the warm summer night. I stumbled backward, breaking the spell, and fled the room. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. I paced the small bedroom, the unsettling experience replaying in my mind. There was a presence in that house, something beyond my comprehension, a force that resided in the spaces between shadow and light. By morning, I was exhausted, yet determined to uncover the truth. The daylight brought a semblance of normalcy, the familiar comfort of routine. I busied myself with chores that needed attending, distracting myself from the mysteries of the night. Yet, the unease lingered, like a shadow that refused to be dispelled. As the sun dipped below the horizon once more, I felt the anticipation of fear settle over me. That evening, as darkness fell, I returned to my grandmother's bedroom. The room greeted me with its ghostly stillness, and the mirror stood silently, reflecting nothing but the dim light. I approached it cautiously, half expecting the voices to return, but the room remained silent. I spent hours there, waiting for something, anything, that might explain the presence I felt. My thoughts turned to my grandmother, her stories of this house and the spirits that dwelled within. She had always spoken of them with respect, as if they were part of the family. Perhaps they were, in their own spectral way. As the night stretched on, weariness overtook me. I slumped into the old rocking chair by the window, my eyes heavy with fatigue. The chair creaked softly as I rocked, the gentle motion lulling me into a light doze. It was then, in that twilight state between waking and sleep, that I felt it, a hand, gentle yet firm, resting on my shoulder. I jolted awake, but the room was empty, the presence gone. My heart hammered in my chest as I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing beside me, but there was no one, only the shadows that clung to the corners of the room. It was then that I understood. The house was alive, inhabited by a presence that transcended the physical realm. It watched and waited, its intentions unknowable. And yet, it wasn't malicious. It was merely there, a guardian of memories and secrets long buried. The next morning, I packed my things with a newfound sense of peace. The house had shared its story, whispered its mysteries to me in the language of shadows and dreams. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a connection to a deeper history, one that spanned generations and lives intertwined with the unseen. As I drove away, the house faded from view, bathed in the soft glow of morning light. The road stretched out before me, leading back to my life in the city. But a part of me remained behind, entwined with the essence of that old house and the presence that called it home. And though I could not see it, I knew it watched over me, a silent guardian in the realm of dreams.